Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
Listening to Season 3, where we're talking all about great teams. I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI and CD. Today, I'm joined by Raji Subramanian, CTO of OpenDoor. Raji, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I can't wait to get into it. In a second, I'll give you a moment to give us all an intro and a little bit of background. But we're talking about teams, building great teams, and there's a few things from your history which we'll get into in a minute that tell me you're going to have some exciting things to say. So, just for everyone who's listening, can you tell us, 2 minutes just about OpenDoor and how you got there?
Again, as I look through the journey of coming into OpenDoor, I would like to kind of start off with OpenDoor itself. OpenDoor is a residential real estate e-commerce platform that customers choose to buy, sell, and transition between homes. It's revolutionizing the residential real estate industry for customers and transforming a very traditional industry by digitizing it and creating that differentiated customer experience and putting the control back in the hands of homeowners and would-be homeowners. My journey to OpenDoor has been very interesting, but before that, I can maybe introduce myself and give a little bit of context, because that journey is tied to that. I would say I'm a technologist by training and my experience. I'm an operator by my passion and an enabler by my sense of purpose. So in many ways, I had a long history at Amazon. I was a very early Amazon employee. I was a founding team member of Amazon Marketplace as well as Amazon Web Services. I led a lot of teams there, built a fair amount of those platforms. And then later I led organizations within Amazon Kindle and also the finance engineering operation. Now, all of that experience helped me start and co-found Pro.com. Pro.com was a company that was building the technology behind home improvement. And OpenDoor acquired Pro in 2021, and that's kind of how I came into Pro. What brought me into what brought me into OpenDoor through that journey was what I call as the 3 Ps. It's the passion, purpose, and people behind it. Passion is very core to everything that I do, and for me, engineering is that passion. Solving hard engineering problems is the first thing that I kind of look for. An example of it is the pricing engine that we've been building at OpenDoor. The purpose behind it is, as an engineer, you can apply your passion in many different places. For me, using that means towards a very sound end is critical, which has a larger meaning to the world. And the mission of OpenDoor is kind of what excited us as we were doing the sale to OpenDoor. That mission is about improving lives of people through the homes. And it is an amazing team of missionary builders and innovators here. That is my journey to OpenDoor. And in many ways, as I go back and look at it, the parallels that I see as to what made Amazon a great company, I see many of those themes here at OpenDoor, which excites me a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That intro sets up really nicely. You talk a lot about on that journey, like connecting with the vision and mission of OpenDoor and the passion behind that. And I alluded to this earlier, but I'm going to read a couple of quotes that I found in the announcement of the acquisition of Pro.com. One, at Pro.com, the co-founders built a world-class team. So, bang on in terms of subject, deep experience in merging operations and technology at scale. So, world-class team. I want to understand what that actually means. Like, I'm guessing you didn't write the press release, but it's okay. I still want to get into it. And then the other thing that really lined up was, like OpenDoor, both these teams start and end with the customer, operate with a startup mentality, and act from ownership. So being really customer centric, having a sense of ownership, you alluded to that passion, and really, from the perspective of wanting to solve really hard engineering problems. And I think that sometimes we struggle with that balance of, like, am I solving a really hard technical problem, or am I leading with the customer problem and it just happens to be interesting that it's solved with some great technology. So So let's start with the first one. Like when you think about a world-class team, what does that mean for you? Like if you had to break down what is it that would allow you to define a team as world-class? What comes to mind?
I think there's four things that come to my mind. The first is I think building any world-class team starts with its vision. And vision is super critical for any team to be world-class. And the second thing that comes to my mind is culture. The third is how you actually have the practices and mechanics in place to institutionalize that culture at scale. And the last is the team itself, the people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kind of break down each of these 4 points here, it kind of always starts with the vision. It is about making sure that there's this entire company of folks or an entire group of people aligned and working towards a single mission and vision. And that alignment is super critical because when you have alignment, you can actually execute pretty quickly and do things that matter. When you don't have alignment, it kind of completely breaks down. But as I look at an engineering organization, many times I'm asked, should an engineering organization have a vision that's very different from the company's vision? Are they the same or are they different? And one way I've always looked at it, and this is something that I've learned through the journey, is that engineering is the means to that end. And if the company's vision is that end, the engineering journey and the vision is how do you actually create that template to get to that end? Let's take a few examples. The first thing that I ask whenever I talk to a team is, are you value creators or are you value implementers? It also goes back to the start and end with the customer question.
Mm-hmm.
And if an engineer comes to me and says, I'm a programmer versus I'm a builder and an innovator, that's the distinction. When every engineer on the team is looking at the vision from the perspective of creating value versus implementing, then the big difference is engineering involved with the why, the what, and the how, or just the how? And that is an example of as I create visions, the vision is about something that takes you to the company's vision, and it encompasses the why, the what, and the how. As we take the vision down, a vision alone is not enough. A vision can work for one person, but if you want to take it through an entire organization, that's when culture starts playing a role. And we can look at culture from many different perspectives, whether it's operating principles, whether it's company values or operating tenets. It's all of these that kind of constitute that culture. And some of the cultural elements, as you called out, that are very strong, that I've seen in durable generational companies, is that anchoring on that customer. And again, when we talk about anchoring on that customer, it is about that business centricity comes in from customer centricity. And as engineers, when we're creating value, there should be no disconnect between those two. And if there is a disconnect, it means that the aspiration needs to be reset. And if you can reset that aspiration, then it kind of changes. But at the end of the day, the culture that you write, print, and put up on a page is only that. If it's not, it does not translate to that practice. And this is something that I learned at Amazon and again see in a very strong way at OpenDoor. It is about the mechanics that you kind of put in place to translate that culture. And how does that translate? And there are many examples. And as I was thinking about the examples that come through, whether it's like the customer centricity, the ownership, or even how you use data to make decisions without a bias, that can be the mechanics that you see across the entire company. But there are things even within engineering that actually constitutes that culture. I was thinking about CircleCI, for example, and how it is actually a cultural element for any team that you work. It is about that continuous deployments that you do. It is about taking a waterfall model and then how do you actually break it down? That's a cultural element. It's a very different element, but it's a practice that you kind of put in place. At OpenDoor, it is about that starting and ending with the customer. It is about that startup mentality, and it is about that ownership, among many other things that we do here.
Yeah, well, obviously, I love the connection to CircleCI as a, or we'll say CI and CD, like great software delivery as a cultural cornerstone. Let's call it that, right? Like we're all here to deliver effectively. And to your earlier point, are we here to sort of create value or just implement it? I mean, we're thinking about why we're here, and are we aligning that with the mission and vision of the overall company? I think that's, if I can play it back, you're sort of describing it's important to have your engineering context around what that overall mission is, but unless you're driving to support the overall mission, like, what are you doing? You can't be at odds with the goals of the company, right? And so coming back to we're talking about great software delivery. Why do teams matter in great software delivery? When you have a culture that's really embraced that, the team members have embraced that, then you're going to be operating at a much higher cadence, focused on what matters to the customer, and then able to deliver that effectively because you've sort of built that practice in. So one thing that's really interesting for me as you talk through that is the engineers, right? Specifically, I'm talking to this engineer. How do you think of yourself? I'm talking to this engineer. How do you think of yourself? But we're talking about teams, and often I think we've landed on the fact that in software delivery, kind of the unit of production, if you will, is the team, right? The team works together to get things done. How do you balance the role of individuals against the role of the team or the culture of the team? Meaning, how much do individuals influence that, and how much does the influence go the other way? Like, could you take anyone and put them into a team with a great culture and they'll join in? Or do you have to have a set of individuals who have great culture and bring that to form a team with the great culture?
This is a question that actually really excites me. In fact, whenever we talk about culture and when we talk about individuals versus teams, or bringing in new individuals to the team, the question is, how do you build a culture? And more often than not, when we talk about that building of that culture, there is this assumption that there is a culture, whether it's codified in a set of statements and practices, and every engineer coming into that team is kind of conforming to the culture. And I use the ship of Theseus example on this. The way I look at culture and how cultures get built between teams is that there is a base of culture, and with every engineer that comes in, the culture evolves. There's a blend that happens at any point of time, and the teams that really take it up a notch and are able to operate and move from the good to the great, that embracing of every new team member that comes in, that's a symbiotic process. And so culture evolves over time. And what I've learned and what I've seen is that teams that are open to that process of symbiosis really excel. They're also excelling for a slightly different reason. In many ways, if you look at one of the core values that we have at OpenDoor, it's about how do you become 1% better every day? And inherently, what's codified in that is that you're not stagnant. And it's that cultural symbiotic process. It is important to have cultural elements, and it's also how you actually embrace new cultures that kind of come in that creates that. So the way I look at it is that with every new team member coming in, that receptiveness is across the board, across both ways. And then you go about building that culture. The next part to that is that whatever that cultural evolution is, it needs to come into the DNA. It needs to come into the day-to-day. It needs to come into the decision-making. It needs to come into the vernacular. It needs to come into how we evaluate performance and how we bring new team members into the team. So what's the way you calibrate and bring new members into the team? It is about all of that.
So I love that notion of symbiosis and then bringing team members in. Is there a very conscious or specific sort of ritual, for lack of a better term, around how you do that? Like, it's possible for someone to show up, start doing things in a slightly different way, and people say, oh, that's interesting, but only some people will notice that it's interesting, right? Versus saying, oh, like, as a team, we're going to adopt this practice that so-and-so has brought, or we recognize now that that's something we haven't been doing, and that's actually really innovative and interesting. So we are going to shift the way we work. Like, I guess, how conscious is that exchange? Or is it something that you are sort of sitting back and letting, watch evolve, if that makes sense?
I think there are a few foundations to it. It's very subtle, but very important. There is a climate you kind of create. So I think one of the cultural values that I value very highly is that building openness. Making sure that is one aspect of your culture is super critical. Because once you have that, then the discussion and the dynamics of the discussion are slightly different. I think you cannot force this.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot come in and say, hey, let's sit together and talk about what are some of the things that you've seen and what are some of the things that you've seen. I think it happens through practice. I'll give one example of it in terms of the start and end to the customer, and then you'll kind of see how it permeated in. And this was a discussion we were having at OpenDoor. I've had it at Pro. I've had it at Amazon as well. One of the cultural elements that kind of was brought in at Pro and is a big theme at OpenDoor as well is when you're looking at customer experience, are you measuring it in averages or are you measuring it in percentiles? Seem innocuous, right? How can that bring in culture? But if you go down a little bit, the average means that every person becomes a statistic. A percentile means there is no place to hide your defects in terms of how you're serving your customers. So I'm taking something as simple as how you measure metrics, and someone could come in and say, let's add a TP there. What's your top percentile on something? And let's measure it. An engineer could do it, an engineering manager could do it, even a leader could do it. But once you do that, it shifts. It shifts from the perspective of actually having a metric that says, yeah, I can feel good about my customer experience, to really becoming customer centric. So that is just one example. And there's many such examples. The second example could be in terms of how you're going ahead and interviewing, and what are the data points you look for, and how you go ahead and change your process of interviewing to make sure that you're able to evaluate candidates without a bias, with the right benefit of doubt as you're going through that process. So that cultural evolution happens in what we do day to day, and at some point the themes emerge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm sort of like, I'm on two tracks in my head right now because I love the percentile example, right? Which is sort of everybody's experience counts versus the average experience counts, right? Like, let's really put ourselves in the shoes of a broad spectrum of customers and see how they're working with us. And then to the point of your earlier symbiosis, it's a little bit similar in the sense of every person here has some experience that counts, and how do we build the best package out of all of those things. So when you talk about interviewing specifically there, as another example that you brought up, I mean, again, I guess it's similar in the sense that you have a culture which you value, right? You've taken time to curate, maybe feels like a good word to use, but you're also bringing new people in, right? And they're bringing different experiences that may be helpful. So how do you make the call between sort of, this is someone who is bringing some unique perspective that I think is really interesting, or how do you differentiate, versus this is someone who's not going to be motivated by the culture that we've built, someone who's looking for something different. Like those, it may be subtle, but I think it's a really important difference, right? Someone who's not going to succeed here because they're not going to be excited about the way we think about it. I mean, maybe they're just not customer centric. That's okay, right? Not everyone is going to be. Versus this is someone with some unique perspective that's going to make us all better. Like, how do you differentiate between those two?
I actually think there's like the world of the known that you're interviewing for and the world of the unknown that you're interviewing for. It's always very comfortable for us to interview from the perspective of the world of the known. And every time, if you look at the perspective of any job interview or any interview that you're going to as an interviewer, I think every interviewer is wearing two hats. The first hat is easy. The second hat is more subtle. The first hat when you're interviewing is, I'm evaluating this person for this role to come into this company. There are these cultural parameters I'm going to look for. I'm going to look for examples. And you can walk through that. What projects did you work on? How do you measure success? Tell me about a hard problem that you solved, or tell me what excites you. All of these will give you examples. And you can go into it with as much technical depth as you want. That's in the world of the known. And then you're trying to map it back to the culture that you want to build. And then you're kind of evaluating. There's a second hat of the world of the unknown. And the world of the unknown is an interviewer is also going in there to learn. And as you think about it from that learning hat, I think that learning hat is about what can I learn from this person and what is the new things that this kind of person brings in. And how often have we sat in an interview where an interviewer is wearing the first hat and not the second. So the first thing I do with my team is to train them to be able to wear both hats. And those hats start from the day of the interview to the time that to the time that a candidate comes in, and it's a lifelong journey. And it is absolutely a lifelong journey of how you can actually bring in both and learn. And so the unknowns would be things like the individual is sharing an experience with you and share something different. And you'll say, that resonates with me. It aligns with me. And I like more of that here. Let's talk about it. And then that kind of the embracing of the culture comes in. And it could go along many dimensions. A company that operates with a lot of empathy might hear someone talking about data-driven decision making and say that we need that. On the other hand, a company that is very rigorously data-driven decision making focus might hear an example of how anecdotes help them build a different product. And so if you look at it, you can actually bring that blend and you'll learn that anecdotes as well as data can both help you build a better product. And how do you bridge that and create that culture?
So can you give me an example of the type of question that you would ask or how you would get to that in an interview? So as you're speaking to someone, is it an extension of the response to a question that you would, that would be more in the first hat, I guess, in the way that you described it, like I'm looking for their perspective on a particular thing? Or do you actually create space with some more open-ended type of questions, exploring experience and giving people the chance to present that kind of different perspective?
I think it's a combination. I think it is important that you allow and enable the candidate to kind of be able to share their experience and weave their stories in. And as a part of that weaving of that story, that's kind of when you can get more precise. For example, one of the questions I ask is, what's the accomplishment they're most proud of? And typically, and with specifically engineers, I ask them for a hard technical problem they solved and how do they go about solving it? Why are they proud of it? And they will share. They will share it was because it was an algorithm that happened. And if they're only talking about the algorithm, I'll ask, what was the impact? What was the customer impact? And then I'll ask, how do they go about measuring that customer impact? How did it move the needle? And then the big shift that you kind of see happen here is that is an engineer able to look at both worlds? Is the engineer be able to look at the technical world of this amazingly complex thing that they've built and translate that to impact? That shares a lot. That talks about a lot about are they looking at it from a value implementer perspective versus a value creator perspective? That's one example. The other example I'll ask, the other question I'll ask, usually as a follow-on, I'll ask, was there a case at any point of time where the signals that you were getting from data were wrong? How did you validate it, and how did you actually fix it? That's one way I would ask. And there's a classic piece to this, and I'll give an example here, which was interesting. This was an Amazon example, and I've had similar examples at OpenDoor as well, where we were talking about customer experience. We were measuring customer experience, and there were 4 different systems as a part of the fulfillment engine. There was search, there was browse, there was ordering, there's fulfillment, and each one gives you a certain metric that you go ahead and measure. The customer really does not care whether you have 4 systems under it or 10 systems and how beautifully those metrics are working. Let's assume a person placed an order and they need to get a book. They're going to look for when did they place an order and when did they get a book. Now, if each part of the system is going to max out its SLA and they're going to get a book 30 days after they ordered it, that's not a great experience. And so it's a question of how do you go beyond what you're doing to stitch it. So usually, how do you recognize that? You can recognize it by measuring data. You can actually also recognize it because 3 customers called into the customer service center and complained. And your CS rep might be able to come in and tell you, hey, there seems to be some problem here because everything is beautiful. All your metrics decks look green and within the SLA, but the customer service reps are getting calls about it. It's anecdotal, and then you go back and measure. So as you're going through the journey, you go down. The second thing I'm a deep believer in is being able to drill. So essentially, if you start with one question, how deep can you go? How much of a handle did an engineer have on that problem or an engineering leader have on that problem? Was it superficial? Did they really understand the details? Could they dive into the details? Could they actually come back up and connect the dots to the rest of the business? And those are some of the examples I kind of look for. I also ask at times, what mistakes did you make? It's interesting. We all kind of we are all very free with sharing where we succeeded. But what were some of the mistakes you made? And I have a whole ton of mistakes that I made. And and you can ask. That kind of shares a lot. It shares about whether someone is vocally self-critical, whether someone is able to embrace things that they did right as well as they did wrong, and how are they going to operate within your company as they come in.
Yeah. Well,
Those are some questions. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like we could have had you on the last season too, that we just wrapped up, which was all about, learning from failure and sort of how people, learn and grow and all those things that you're looking for. I love all those examples. I guess as a side note, that now anyone listening to this has an excellent chance of navigating an open door interview because everything that that folks are looking for. But speaking of giving you the opportunity to share your story a little bit, I wanted to transition into our wrap up element for this season, which is the team spotlight. So, can you give me tell me a little bit of a story about a team that you worked on that was like the best or a great team, with the one caveat that you can't tell me about the team that you're on right now. And when did you realize it was great? Like, what really stood out for you about that team, whether you led it or were part of it, whatever is the best example for you?
One of the favorite times of my life, and I still remember those days. In fact, I still remember the day when the shifts had happened, was with Amazon Marketplace. Amazon was this fairly well-known company in the retail space, and they were trying to build Marketplace. And as with any new product and business line you're trying to create, you have to experiment a lot. You also have to experiment as an underdog in a large company that has a thriving business. And so we went through many different experiments to figure out how to make Marketplace work. And then it came down to one launch. Very simple. You can actually still go to the Amazon website and see it. They actually brought Amazon's Marketplace and retail spaces together. If you go today and search for any product on Amazon and go to its detail page, you have a single add to cart, and you can buy products from Amazon or from third-party sellers. We called it, it was like a very mundane name. We called it single detail page. Boom, magic happened. Because all we did was brought the world's biggest selection to the biggest consumer base and let them do their thing, and we created trust. And at that moment, things changed. It took a lot of work. We had to have a vision. We had to have a vision with conviction, especially because you're an underdog in a large company. You have to fail and be okay failing many times and be okay doing that when your colleagues are succeeding in the areas that they're going through. And 3, you have to rapidly innovate and experiment. We were not engineers alone. We were cracking the code on how to go ahead and make that happen. And when you crack the code and you sit back and see, today it drives 60% of Amazon's transaction. Hundreds of millions of consumers use it across the world. And I actually see so many parallels to where I am right now. You're doing the same thing within OpenDoor. I won't go into exactly the OpenDoor piece, and I want to respect what you kind of shared, but the journey of how you actually create an e-commerce platform and bring worlds together between what we call as the retail equivalent and marketplace equivalent is the journey that we're doing. And it's an amazing experience. It's kind of nice to be there again after 2 decades.
Well, yeah. And what I love about that is, you have that experience, right? I'm sure the launch was the moment, right, when everything connected, but the willingness, the feeling that you have in the team of being willing to experiment, to try, know, hey, we're failing, but we know there's success here somewhere and we're going to keep going and we're going to find it. And then to carry that forward, right? To be able to then build a team and say, look, this is what it feels like, but I know what it feels like after this, right? When we hit that moment and really use that to, I'm sure, sort of charge up and energize the team and rally them around the goal. I love it. So I guess last question to bring it all home. Are there a couple people that you would recommend who know a lot about building teams that we should be getting on the show and talking to so we can get a even bigger picture of how to do this really well?
Certainly, I have definitely 3 people. The first is our president at OpenDoor, Andrew Loaki. Awesome team builder. The second is Matt Williams, my co-founder at pro.com. And again, long history at Amazon. And the third is Matt Swan, who's the CTO of Nubank. And I'm happy to connect you to all three of them.
Amazing. I would love that. I mean, whether or not we get everyone on the show, I just want to talk to everybody because I love great teams. I love working in great teams. I mean, I can see the smile on your face as you think about it. Who doesn't, right? Who doesn't want to be part of something that is working, that's excelling, where everyone is rallying together and just achieving amazing things. So thank you so much for all that. Thanks to everyone for tuning in today. If you're enjoying the podcast, subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. If you have people you want us to talk to about great teams, hit us up on Twitter at CircleCI. If you have other subjects that you think we should tackle in the next seasons, find us there as well. And Raji, thanks again so much for joining me today. This has been absolutely awesome.
Thank you, Rob.